Players hate legendary resistance. Let's fix it. There are a number of reasons why players hate legendary resistance. Aside from the obvious that it spoils their plans, there's a couple of nuances, I guess, to the topic. Players are encountering something that is a legendary opponent. They are expecting to bring their A game and to bring out all the best stuff to deal with something that they a lot of the times have been looking forward to fighting for a really long time. You know, maybe they've been expecting this battle to happen for sessions, or maybe it's just been sprung upon them. But when you break out Tiamat out of some portal with 5 dragon heads and breath weapons galore, you can be pretty sure that your players are expecting an epic fight. Legendary resistances make a ton of sense from a DMing side of things in order to make that fight epic as it should be, right? The basic idea between a legendary resistance is that if somebody casts a spell or uses an effect that would basically shut down your monster so that it can't perform its function and can't be an epic cool fight, you have a no button. And so you're just like, ooh, Psychic Lance, no. Hold Monster, no. You're going to just slay it with that massive special spell that one-shot kill, no. Right? It really doesn't matter what the option is. The no button is there in order for us to save our precious boss monster and ensure that the battle goes the way we plan instead of the way that the players plan. And frankly, that sucks. That steals away player agency to some degree, because they now know that if they're fighting a big bad boss with legendary resistance, that there's not really anything they can do to just circumvent the fight and win without slogging their way through. And so you see a number of different strategies pop up by players in attempting to play the legendary resistance game and work their way through it. One of the tactics that players will often use to try and play the legendary resistance game is to throw tons of little spells and status effects and abilities at a creature, hoping to suck up those legendary resistances with lesser spells, saving their best options for later in the fight. Most battles in Dungeons & Dragons really only take 3 to 4 rounds in order to complete, even great big epic boss battles. That means that for several rounds, your player is using its suboptimal, potentially boring opportunity to try and suck up these legendary resistances so that they can get to the good stuff, so that they can have fun with the big spells that they really want to be throwing and with accomplishing the fight. Sometimes that's what happens. They spend the first two or so rounds burning through legendary resistances. The tension rises a little bit during that time, and then it gets to the crescendo of the third round, and finally the legendary resistances are gone, and they can start breaking out the good stuff. The fight turns in their favor, and voila, the heroes emerge victorious. Now, that can be pretty cool. It's a not a bad feel, really. Like you're coming from a low point and you're slowly grinding your way up. The tension beats until you reach your climax. Everybody gets what they want, has a good time, and quickly the bad guy dies, and you get to enjoy the rewards. It's not a terrible way to enjoy your Dungeons & Dragons session, but we can do better. Another way that players will try to play the resistance game is to just fight the creature without worrying about anything that they think the DM would be likely to use a legendary resistance on. Fireball, A-okay. Thing might save, might not save, but the damage really isn't going to matter against your great big legendary monster, right? So they'll just try to play the damage game and just Nova their way through. They'll focus on attack rolls and armor class and every option except saving throws in order to ensure that they aren't suffering for these legendary resistances. The way that works out, you have a kind of vanilla straight battle of just damage dealt, damage received, damage dealt, damage received, until eventually the bad guy dies. Tension rises slowly as the player's hit points drop off, but there's no real payoff of like a sudden tension switch, and everything just sort of follows a very linear path. It's not a terrible way to enjoy a boss battle, but it starts to feel really like every other battle where players are just hoarding resources. It's kind of dull and doesn't really have any highs and lows to get excited about, and the battle is frankly a little flat, kind of boring. Another way that players will try to do it is they will take the hit and blow through their resources. They lead out with the most powerful save or suck spell they got, and they throw those repeatedly at the bad guy, trying to get all of those legendary resistances used up. Kind of the reverse philosophy of the other one, where they're hoping that they have enough high-level resources to be able to burn through the legendary resistances until something sticks. And when that something sticks, suddenly the battle has a sharp turn in its tension and beats, and there's that exciting moment. This battle turns out all right for the players in the long run, because at the end of that, they do have that sharp turnaround when something goes their way, if the bad guy lives that long. If, however, the bad guy takes enough damage during those couple of rounds of burning all of these high-level spells, trying to get a reaction and trying to pull a resistance, then the monster runs the risk of dying before the players land one of their great spells. Keep in mind that the monster still gets its saving throws, so there's a decent chance that even after they've burned through your legendary resistances, their big grand plan won't pay off. And that feeling is pretty disappointing. On top of that, from a tension standpoint, they're blowing every one of their biggest, best, gnarliest spells, and the best reaction that they can get is that you fail your saving throw and declare, nope, that's kind of boring, and takes a lot of the wind out of your sails. And the players who are following that particular mentality and plan, from my experience, they're pretty bored through the early stages of the fight. It's not until something really gets through past legendary resistance and sticks that they get that big high where their plan paid off. And if you take that away from them, either because the bad guy died or because you did something to make them immune, or there's some other thing in play that ruins it for them, they come away from that fight feeling really disappointed. All right, so how can we fix it? That's the big question. Now, there's a handful of ways that we can try to improve on our legendary resistance use. We could just say, don't have it, right? No legendary resistance. But frankly, if the players do get their way and just drop the you don't get to do anything card and then kill the big bad boss, that is hugely fun for the players sometimes. If it happens every single fight, then you quickly will find your players going elsewhere because they're bored, and those fights are just flat and bland. There's the high payoff at the beginning, then the boring slog through people's hit points, and then you're done, and you're still down here at the low energy. It's not a very exciting feel. Every now and then, if it's a fast enough encounter, it can be exciting to have that sudden turn off and you're done, but most of the time it ends up being a real drag. Players might not recognize that up front, and so they might think that they want their plan to work every time, but they really will enjoy it more with legendary resistances in play. Legendary resistances are a good mechanic. They're just a complicated one for the tension and the feels that are going to be involved in it. So in order to fix that, we can do a couple of things. First and foremost, any creature that has legendary resistance, it needs to be foreshadowed. Very rarely should your players be taken by surprise that a creature has legendary resistances. The mentality that they go into as a player and as a character needs to shift so that when that no button gets pushed, it doesn't just feel like a DM's gotcha or like a punishment for good planning. It needs to feel like something that they could have predicted was going to happen so that they could choose the strategy that they wanted to use against it. Foreshadowing is super important there, simply so that your player can make the decision of how they want to interact with that mechanic. Making that decision will make whichever response comes about feel a lot less invasive and a lot less like a disruption of their agency. A way to improve your use of legendary resistance is to adopt one of several different strategies that can make legendary resistance fit the theme and character of the creature that you are using, and by doing so, it reacts a little bit differently in terms of the pacing and beats of your encounter. Two specific ways that you can adjust your legendary resistance use is to, one, use it as a role-playing tool, or two, use it for everything. The use it for everything approach can be a challenging one if your party has a lot of status effects that are just going to completely shut down your monster. That said, the use it for everything approach makes legendary resistance a short-term speed bump. If during the first round a fireball, a fairy fire, and a hold monster all strike the creature at the same time from 3 different casters in your group, 1, 2, 3 legendary resistance is done. That first round of the combat, you've negated a significant detraction to the monster's situation and allowed it to have one full round of glory where it gets to use up all its legendary actions, gets to make all of its own actions and attacks, and you can turn the battle in your favor there. But it also sets you up for a quick turnaround and switcheroo, as it's been owning the battlefield, automatically winning on all of these checks, and then next round immediately it goes to the default state of maybe passing half or a little more or a little less than half, depending on the targeting of your players and the spells that they're using, of its saving throws. So it switches from I can handle everything to this is a fair fight, and then after one of those nasty debilitating spells lands, then by round 3 we're in the holy cow, the players are so awesome and my monster, it's gonna die phase, and we get a exciting battle of ratcheting tension throughout. Ultimately, when it comes to the use everything approach, we remember for ourselves that legendary actions are not there to provide us with an opportunity for the monster to win the fight. We don't really want them to win the fight, usually, right? Total party kills are not actually the goal. What we want to do is prolong the fight a little bit so that we can have this epic encounter. We need to remember that 3 or more legendary resistances, each time they're used, they are a strong downbeat for the party, that they feel like they just lost something, and we then have to give them the opportunity to bring it back up. So if we're going to use them all in one fell swoop, 1, 2, 3, downbeat, 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 when they're at their lowest, things start to turn their way. And that curve right there creates an epic, exciting encounter. Another way that we can use legendary resistances in order to enhance our game is to use them as a roleplay tool. As a simple example from a recent session of Curse of Strahd that I ran, Strahd is kind of the prototypical arch-villain and likes to show up on a regular basis throughout the story, taunting his foes and generally showing how much better than them he is. And of course, my party couldn't stand by and watch somebody have the life drained out of them. But Strahd was really there just to show them how helpless they were. And so when they struck at him and the damage was instantly healed, they recoiled in shock and horror. And then one of the party, using his channel divinity as an Oath of Conquest paladin, he washed the battlefield with a shadowy aura of fear that held Strahd's wolves at bay, and with a nice natural 1, Strahd also failed. However, this is Strahd. He's showed up to inspire fear into these guys. He's a crazy prideful vampire, and there is no way that he's going to cower back from this Oath of Conquest paladin, who he could quite easily kill even while under the fear effect. And so I had him use that legendary resistance, because legendary resistance here was a role-playing tool to show, look, I'm way too prideful to let that slide, even though it doesn't mechanically bother me that it gets past. Using legendary resistances as an enhancement to our roleplay can show our players a little insight into the mind behind the monster that they're facing. And it just creates a little bit of added depth. So, while we're still using legendary resistances in that instance to stop spells like the Psychic Lance that are going to completely shut down our big bad evil guy, we also use them in smaller situations where the roleplay demands it, so that the players can get that insight into the monster that they face. Another way that we can improve our legendary resistances is to take them off of our big bad guy and put them somewhere else in the world. Obviously, that doesn't actually mean that we're going to remove them from the monster. They need access to those legendary resistances in order to be able to use them and interact with it. However, what we can do is we can make legendary resistances come from some source that can be interacted with by our players' characters more intentionally. For instance, if we have a mad wizard with legendary resistances in his laboratory, there's arcane devices around the room, incidentally 3 of them, that are crackling with energy, and when a spell comes out to snare the wizard and debilitate him, this crackle of energy snaps from the side and stops it. Suddenly we have a different target for our players to attack. They could try and destroy those legendary resistance generators. They could be regenerating and need to be destroyed first in order to get to the wizard's underlying saving throws, weak as we know a lot of them are going to be. They could require an interaction with skills or abilities that don't normally see a lot of front line in combat, and provide an alternate victory condition, or at least an alternate path to victory that might not be there if they were just reliant on those legendary resistances and they were a part of them. This tactic can be used in a lot of different ways. You can apply it as nodes on armor. It can be runes on the scales of a dragon. It can be portions of a creature's body that need to be destroyed first with called shots. We can come up with all sorts of different mechanics, and we need to remember that ultimately, even though these legendary resistances might be stripped away by targeted specific action, our characters, our players, have invested themselves in that situation, and they are playing the game the way they should be. When we do this, we have a lot of control over how the players are going to interact with these. We can decide the difficulty classes, we can decide how many actions it might take, and it might actually make legendary resistances more powerful while still making them more engaging in some circumstances, depending upon the result that we're looking for. At the end of the day, one of the things we need to remember about legendary resistances is, even though they're there to stop these certain things, if we had them not at all, the monster would still almost always get some form of saving throw to decide success or failure. Our players are looking for a fair game where they can understand how the mechanics of the world are going to work. They're looking for the opportunity to be able to make smart choices that are going to lead to the occasional big bad boss that you've been working on for a long time getting himself spanked in 1.5 rounds and not getting to do anything at all. That's okay. Don't take it as a failure that your players had a great success. Celebrate their success. Have fun with them. They are pumped, and you should be too. It's a great time when your players walk away from a fight saying, "Man, that was epic. That was so awesome. I can't believe you did that. Did you see that spell that he cast? Did you see how I stunned that guy with my monk?" Those are awesome moments at our table too. And we need to just sort of loosen up a little bit about the whole legendary resistance thing and find ways to make it fun for the players, because ultimately, that's why we're there. As always, it has been a pleasure to be with you. If you have a chance to subscribe and you're interested in hearing more, please do. Follow this link here for our latest video. Remember, there's always another opinion. Just ask my wife.